NY YNs bring back the Decepticons gang. The apartment smelled like za smoke, Don Julio, and boiled oodles of noodle soups that had been sitting too long. The radiator knocked like it was trying to get someone's attention, but nobody cared. Outside, Brownsville, Brooklyn hummed. NYPD sirens in the distance, a train rattling overhead, bass from a passing car vibrating the windows just enough to remind them the city was still alive without them. Inside, 5 young men ranging from ages 17 to 22 sat scattered around the living room like discarded pieces from a puzzle nobody wanted to finish. Lil Mars was on the floor, back against the couch, scrolling on his phone, reading Snapchat messages. He still had a red bandana tied around his wrist out of habit, but it felt fake now, like wearing a dead man's name. Rakeem leaned against the kitchen counter, bottle in hand, taking long pulls and staring into nothing. Twin and Trell shared the couch, their laughter forced, loud in a way that tried to cover humiliation. And Spaz, quiet, always quiet, stood near the window, watching the block like it might explain what just happened. Nobody said it at first. Then Keem broke. "They violated us," he said, voice thick with alcohol and rage. "Straight violated us, bro." Twin laughed sharp. "Violated? Nigga, they stripped us. Took everything. Colors, names, all that. They said we was reckless," Trell added. "Said we brought heat. Like that ain't the point." Lil Mars finally looked up from his phone. "Word of my mommy, son." Everyone turned to him. "They ain't say we was reckless," he continued. "They said we was replaceable." That word sat heavy. Replaceable. In New York, that was worse than being dead. Dead meant you mattered enough to be noticed. Replaceable meant the block would keep breathing without you. Spaz finally spoke, voice low. "So what we gonna do now, gang?" No one answered. Outside, a group of younger kids walked past laughing, one of them flashing red without even knowing what it meant. The irony burned. Keem slammed the bottle down on the counter. "I've been repping the 5 since I was 14. Now I'm supposed to just, what? Be a fucking civilian now? Get a job?" Twin snorted. "You can't even pass a drug test, boy. Stop it." They laughed again, but it died quick. The truth was ugly. Without the set, without the structure, they were just 5 broke YNs with reputations and nowhere to put them. Bloods didn't forget disrespect. Crips didn't forgive weakness. And civilians? Civilians didn't last. A door creaked behind them. "Y'all sound like somebody stole y'all lunch money." The voice was old, rough, amused. They all turned as Uncle Ray stumbled out of the back room, ketchup-stained shirt half-buttoned, bottle of white Hennessy dangling from his fingers like an accessory. Ray wasn't anybody's real unk. He was just old enough, just related enough, and just present enough to earn the title. He'd been crashing there since winter, claiming he was getting back on his feet, which in Ray language meant drinking and telling stories nobody asked for. Ray squinted at them, took in the scene. "Why y'all sitting around looking lost?" Keem rolled his eyes. "Mind your business, Unc." Ray grinned, missing 2 teeth. "This is my business, nephew. I live here." Lil Mars sighed, all 5'5" of him standing up to grab a lighter sitting on the coffee table. "We got kicked out, Unc." Ray paused mid-sip. "Kicked out of what?" "The gang," Twin said. "Not just sex, money, murder, but the whole nation." Ray blinked once. Then he laughed. Not a chuckle, an old belly-deep laugh that echoed off the cracked walls. "Oh," Ray said. "That's it?" "That's it?" Keem snapped. "You don't know what that mean?" Ray waved a hand. "Nah, I know exactly what that mean. Mean you picked the wrong flag." The room went still. Spaz frowned. "Fuck you mean?" Ray lowered himself into a chair like his bones hurt just thinking about it. "Back in my day, we ain't wear colors. Didn't need 'em." Lil Mars looked at him sideways. "Here we go with this old nigga shit, yo." Ray smiled wider. "Y'all ever hear of the Decepticons?" "You mean Dipset," Trell asked. "Decepticons," Ray corrected. "Not Cameron and Jim Jones, young nigga." Twin smirked. "Unc, your ass must be high right now talking about some damn fake-ass robot cars from a movie, son. A gang named after a cartoon sound fake as fuck." Ray's smile faded, just enough to matter. A lot of things sound fake till somebody get hurt. He took a slow drink, letting the pause work. Ray knew timing. He always had. We started out here in BK late 80s, he said, before social media and Bloods and Crips in the Big Apple. We ain't have colors or no silly shit like that. We just mobbed and then took what we wanted from Herbs. Lil Mars crossed his arms. Every gang say that. Ray shook his head. Nah, every gang say loyalty. We said probability. Spaz tilted his head. Probability? Ray nodded. Dice don't lie, streets don't either. He started pacing, the way old men do when memories wake up muscles that don't work no more. We was juxing niggas in abandoned buildings, basements, rooftops. Money was easy to get back in them days. We the reason the old rapper KRS-One said, Manhattan keep on making it, Brooklyn keep on taking it. Keem scoffed. So where y'all at now? Why ain't y'all become big like the Bloods? Ray stopped, looked at him hard, because everybody who mattered either dead or doing life. Twin leaned forward. Dead ass? Ray's voice dropped. Dead serious, nephew? He continued talking about summer nights when Brooklyn was lawless. Decep ran around $150 and innocent Vicks. The Decepticons didn't fight for corners. They controlled moments, dice games that pulled in hustlers, stick-up boys, even cops off duty. How the gang recruited smart first, violent second. How betrayal was handled quietly, permanently. Lil Mars felt something shifting in his chest, not excitement, recognition. They listened as Ray explained how bigger gangs noticed, tried to absorb them, how the Decepticons refused, even stole some of their members. Wars don't always start with bullets. Sometimes they start with alliances, but the Decep's time ran out when the feds handed down indictments in the early 90s. RICO before people even understood the word. Judge gave out life sentences like they was candy, Ray said. The founders, gone. Streets, changed. Spaz looked up from his iPhone. Unc ain't capping y'all. I Googled this shit, and Decep was wildin' back then. Ray smiled again. We all old now, he said, stumbling back to his room, having drank all of his Henny. The room went quiet in a new way, not defeated, thinking. Trell laughed under his breath. Y'all heard what Unc said? Keem shook his head slowly. No colors, no permission. Twin's eyes gleamed. No leaders to answer to. Lil Mar stood up. What if, he said carefully, what if the town ready for something new? Outside, a group of Bloods walked past laughing, loud, careless. Inside, 5 rejected YNs looked at each other. Not like losers anymore, but like pieces finding a shape. Spaz said it first, quiet. Dangerous. So we bring it back. Twin frowned. Why not? We'll make it better. Outside, the dice of New York kept rolling, and nobody noticed the game had just changed. For the next several hours, they formed what would become the new Decepticons gang. No colors, just code. They didn't shake hands. They didn't chant. They didn't take pictures. Lil Mars made that rule first. If we do this, he said, pacing the living room, we don't look like nobody else. No flags, no matching fits, no gang tats till somebody earn it. Keem frowned. Then how people know who we are? Lil Mars stopped. They don't. Not right away. Spaz leaned against the wall, arms folded. That's the point. Twin snapped his fingers. So what? We just exist. Mars nodded. We move different, bro. They started laying it out, piece by piece, mistake by mistake. No random smoke, no internet threats, no cloud chasing. If somebody claimed Decepticon, they had to bring value, money, access, brains, or silence. Trell laughed. Silence? Spaz answered. Can you shut up when it matter? That one stuck. Recruitment didn't happen in the open. They watched first. Studied who felt displaced, kids kicked out of sets, freelancers tired of answering to loud idiots, hustlers who hated uniforms. They approached people sideways, conversations that sounded like nothing. You tired of rules? You ever feel like you playing somebody else's game? If the answer came too fast, they walked away. Their name moved before they did. Decepticons, people whispered, no colors. They don't pick sides. They everywhere and nowhere. When the Bloods heard about Decep, they laughed at first. Another lame-ass gang, someone said on the block. They'll crash out. Then a dice game in Flatbush got hit by a group of Decepticons who looked like any other gangsters. Then it happened again. Harlem, Then Queens. Crips started blaming Bloods. Bloods blamed Crips. The Decepticons didn't claim it. They let the confusion grow legs. King finally smiled for the first time in weeks. They fighting ghosts. Lil Mars grinned as he counted crumpled hundreds and $20 bills from one of their latest licks. All 5 boroughs felt it. A Crip Trap apartment in Bed-Stuy was robbed of all its work overnight. The 6 lokes inside were all tied up and slapped around as they watched all of their cash and re-up get stuffed in duffel bags and taken out of their sight. In Harlem, a blood-affiliated promoter threw a party that never paid out. The Decept tech gangster had the money rerouted through 3 burner accounts and vanished. Queens saw stash houses raided by people who knew layouts better than residents. By the time anyone realized it was coordinated, it was already everywhere. The new Decepticons didn't hit blocks, they hit systems. That night, 2 sets, Bloods and Crips, clashed over a rumor neither started. Shots rang out. No Decepticons were around. Still, their fingerprints were everywhere. By morning, Instagram was flooded. Videos, accusations, dead friends tagged in captions. The NYPD called it a surge. The streets called it betrayal. And the Decepticons, they called it coming up. Recruitment exploded, requests reaching as far as Hartford and Allentown, PA. I hear y'all different. And I want to move to New York anyway. I don't want to wear colors no more. Lil Mars mostly made the decisions on new members and turned most of them down if they even flinched after being told 8 members would beat them in for 1 full minute during the initiation process. In the Bronx, a sex, money, murder, blood gang member tried to get clout by hitting a Decepticon ran dice game. He walked in the back of the bar confident because he had a fresh, fully loaded Draco tucked under his gray Essentials Fear of God hoodie, but he never got a chance to use it and ended up thrown in a nearby dumpster after getting his eyeballs carved out of his head by a Mexican Decept member who claimed to be part of the cartel back home. By the end of the week, NYC was fractured into paranoia. Nobody trusted allies. Nobody trusted silence. Everybody suspected each other. The new Decepticons multiplied like baby cockroaches in the walls of a filthy house down in Florida with a single mom and 6 snotty-nosed kids living in it. The recruiting was quiet at first, then suddenly everywhere. Members popped up in all 5 boroughs, and even a few in Nassau County and Newark who rode the trains daily to come into the city to do dirt with their new bros. The new Decepticons moved with the same cold precision the old stories warned about. They didn't argue on corners or flash colors for attention. They mapped routes, timed patrols, and struck where money flowed fastest. 5 Decepts brazenly jacked a Loomis armored truck that stalled in traffic after one of them shot out the huge truck's rear tires. One of the 2 security guards aboard drew his service weapon, but was sprayed to shreds by a glizzy with a loaded drum mag, causing the other guard to flee on foot, too scared to return fire. That same week, a jewelry courier on a bicycle got intercepted in downtown Brooklyn near the Barclays Center, between buildings where cameras always seemed to glitch at the wrong moment. Nike warehouses in Queens were looted overnight without a single alarm trip, thanks to one Decept member having a tech background. By the time law enforcement realized the current crime wave wasn't random but a coordinated resurgence, the name Decepticons was already echoing through police radios, news broadcasts, and street whispers alike. What made it worse was how familiar it looked to those old enough to remember the original crew in the 80s who had got clout doing one-punch games and daring robberies that felt more like chaos than strategy, while this new generation of Decepts was copying the blueprint move for move, only faster, sharper, and amplified by the modern technology they had at their disposal. Small businesses in several of the heavily dominated Decept trenches shuttered early. Armored vehicles now traveled in convoys, and even rival gangs began pulling back, unsure whether they were ops or collateral. The city that never slept started glancing over its shoulder again, haunted by a ghost it thought had been buried decades ago, now reborn in a form that didn't just want territory, it wanted everything. The new Muslim mayor wasted no time. Young, disciplined, and unapologetically strict, He stood at the podium flanked by NYPD brass and federal agents announcing a citywide crackdown that would dwarf anything done in decades. He called it Operation Autobots, a name that made reporters exchange confused glances until he explained it himself, a reference to the heroic machines from the Transformers cartoon and movies, protectors sworn to stop destruction no matter the cost. If the Decepticons wanted to model themselves after the thugs from 4 decades ago, he said, then the city would answer with heroes. Within hours, surveillance towers went up in high activity zones, unmarked units flooded transit hubs, and a joint intelligence center began tracking patterns across all 5 boroughs as if preparing for war instead of policing. ICE agents patrolled the grimy streets of Brooklyn and the Bronx, not looking for illegals, but looking for ill young niggas who was part of the unmarked gang. The impact was immediate and suffocating. NYPD helicopters circled longer. Checkpoints at subway stations appeared without warning, and plainclothes officers blended into crowds where Decepticon sets once moved freely. Task force raids hit safe houses before sunrise, kicking in doors with warrants stacked inches thick. The mayor's message was clear. This wasn't just about crime. It was about reclaiming the city's future from a movement that thrived on fear and confusion. For the first time since the Decepticons emerged, they felt pressure from something organized, relentless, and just as strategic as they were, an opponent that wasn't chasing headlines or territory but total shutdown. Complaints from several of the old members started as bitter phone calls and late-night arguments, old voices resurfacing from numbers nobody had saved in decades. To the surviving vets, the new gang wasn't honoring a legacy, they were jacking it. One chilly afternoon, a handful of the original Decepticons gathered on a quiet bench in Prospect Park, watching kids ride bikes where their own meetings once happened in whispers. Time had slowed their bodies, but not their pride. A 6'2" Lowe's manager named Bones said the old gang's name sounded wrong coming from YNs who knew nothing about it. A 60-something barber named Frankie insisted the city would never respect imitators. Big Al, usually the calm one, finally agreed they couldn't sit back while their past was rewritten by some young niggas who didn't bleed for it. Before they left the park, they made a decision none of them wanted to admit felt inevitable. They would confront the new generation face to face. The message went out that night. One of the old heads, hands still steady enough to type, sent a DM to Spaz, who everybody in the streets knew was a founder. No threats, just a time and place. They chose Kings Plaza Mall, public enough to keep things controlled, familiar enough to feel like neutral ground. But respect collapsed the moment they met in the parking garage. One of the vets laughed at the new niggas, calling them internet gangsters playing dress up with a dead name. The insult landed hard. Voices rose, old pride colliding with new hunger, and suddenly both sides remembered why the Decepticons had been feared in the first place. Shoppers hurried to their cars, sensing the tension. What was meant to be a conversation turned into a standoff where nobody wanted to blink first, because in that moment, backing down felt worse than starting a war neither generation could fully control. Why y'all little niggas steal our name? Spaz stared at the salt and pepper haired OG and said, y'all ain't oozing that name no more, so why y'all tripping, bro? As the voices grew louder, mall security came out to the garage and cleared it out, leaving neither side with a resolution. Later on, further attempts by the old heads to have another meeting were dubbed by Trell, Lil Mars, Spaz, and a few other high-ranking members who felt it was senseless. A few days later, the gang met their biggest challenge yet. The raid was supposed to be quick, clinical, silent, and over before sunrise fully burned the haze off the South Bronx skyline. 3 matte black vans rolled through the trash-littered streets without sirens, tires hissing on damp pavement from rain the night before, the headlights cutting across shuttered storefronts and graffiti-scarred gates. Residents who were awake at that hour, night shift workers heading home, insomniacs leaning out apartment windows, teenagers lingering on stoops, felt the tension before they understood it. ICE agents in tactical vests and cheap jeans poured out with rehearsed efficiency, rifles angled low, voices clipped and coded. Their target was a fourth-floor walk-up, where one of the Decepticons' mid-level coordinators, an illegal immigrant from Colombia, had been tracked for weeks through burner phones and surveillance drones. Command believed they were finally about to get this bastard and make him rat out the gang, puncturing the myth of invisibility that surrounded the group. Inside the building, boots thundered up cracked concrete stairs, past doors with broken locks and faded eviction notices curling at the edges. The battering ram struck once, twice. On the third hit, the door splintered inward. Flashbang shouts, smoke filling the hallway. But something was wrong. The apartment was nearly empty, stripped down to a mattress on the floor and a folding table, littered with Chinese takeout containers. On the wall, spray painted in dripping silver, was the Decepticon insignia, a taunt, fresh enough that the paint still glistened. One agent muttered a curse, another stepped forward, noticing a phone left deliberately on the table, screen glowing. A countdown ticked towards 0. Outside, the first motorcycle engine screamed onto the block. They came from every direction at once, dirt bikes weaving between parked cars, riders dressed in dark hoodies and Nike face coverings, headlights flashing like a swarm of mechanical New York City sewer rats. Residents ducked back into buildings as the street erupted in motion. The Decepticons moved with a coordination that suggested hours of planning, barricades overturned into the roadway, garbage bins rolled into choke points, lookout whistles echoing from rooftops. Someone fired the first shot, no one would later agree who, and then the morning exploded into gunfire so loud it seemed to shake dust from the fire escapes. ICE agents scrambled for cover behind their vehicles, returning fire in controlled bursts, but the attackers never stayed still long enough to be pinned down. They fired from alleys, from behind cars, from second-story windows that had been left conveniently unlocked. A Molotov cocktail made out of an empty Hennessy bottle arced through the air, shattering against the hood of one federal van and blooming into a sheet of fire that forced two agents to dive away. Over the chaos, a voice shouted orders through a bullhorn, not panicked, not angry, just cold and precise. The Decepticons weren't trying to hold the ground. They were demonstrating that they could take it whenever they wanted because this was their motherfucking city. Fuck ICE! Minutes stretched into an eternity of smoke and echoing shots. When reinforcements from NYPD SWAT were finally called in, the attackers began to melt away as if dissolving into the city itself. Helmets discarded, hoodies reversed, weapons slipped into hidden compartments in abandoned cars. By the time the first NYPD SWAT Bearcat armored vehicle screeched onto the block, the street looked like the aftermath of an Afghanistan skirmish in 2007. 3 ICE agents lay motionless near the curb, their armored vests darkened with spreading red stains. Another was being dragged toward an ambulance, barely conscious. Residents watched from windows with a mixture of terror and something harder to define, the uneasy awareness that power had shifted, if only for a moment. The footage traveled faster than any official report. iPhone videos captured from high-rise windows spread across social media before noon, each angle feeding the sense that something unprecedented had just happened. Commentators argued over terminology, ambush, insurgency, organized crime, domestic warfare, but none of the words felt sufficient. The Decepticons released no statement, claimed no responsibility, yet their symbol began appearing across the city by evening, projected onto buildings, pasted onto subway walls, scrawled in chalk on sidewalks. It was less a declaration than a whisper carried through millions of conversations. We are still here. In Washington, the mood hardened with every replay of the scene. Intelligence briefings grew sharper, stripped of the cautious language that had dominated earlier discussions. Analysts warned that the group's strength lay not only in numbers but in myth, the belief that they could not be dismantled because they were everywhere and nowhere at once. Advisors crowded the Situation Room, debating responses that ranged from targeted strikes to sweeping federal control of affected neighborhoods. Some argued that overwhelming force would shatter the illusion. Others warned it would only feed it. By nightfall, the president addressed the nation from behind a polished desk, flag standing motionless at his back. His tone carried the weight of controlled anger, each sentence measured but unmistakably severe. He promised decisive action, the restoration of order, and consequences for anyone aiding the group. Yet what lingered in viewers' minds was the hint, delivered almost casually, that all options were on the table, including measures that had not been contemplated on American soil in generations. In living rooms across the country, families watched in silence, sensing that the firefight in the South Bronx had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Across New York City, the reaction was more complicated. Some neighborhoods braced for raids and curfews, others prepared for retaliation from rival groups, sensing opportunity in the chaos. In Decepticon-controlled areas, lookouts doubled, supply routes shifted, encrypted messages flowed through channels law enforcement had yet to crack. The organization adapted in real time, dispersing leadership, decentralizing operations, turning every apartment and storefront into a potential node in a network that no single strike could dismantle. Their strategy was not to confront power head on, but to make confrontation impossibly costly. On rooftops overlooking the Bronx River, young recruits stood watch beside veterans who had seen the movement evolve from a loose street alliance into something closer to a shadow government. They spoke quietly about what came next, about rumors of federal deployments, about whispers that the administration might try to erase entire blocks to prove a point. None of them believed the threats would stop the momentum. Fear, money, and myth had fused into something self-sustaining. Even people who despised the Decepticons had begun adjusting their lives around the group's invisible boundaries. As midnight approached, helicopters circled low over the boroughs, their searchlights drifting across darkened rooftops like restless eyes. Sirens echoed in the distance, never quite reaching the neighborhoods that mattered most. In an apartment overlooking the very street where the raid had begun, a child asked his mother why the sky was so loud. She didn't answer right away. She was watching the news on mute, reading the captions that spoke of escalation, retaliation, the possibility of war in a place that had always been described as too dense, too human for such words. Somewhere in the city, a projector flickered to life against the side of an abandoned warehouse, casting the Decepticon symbol 30 feet high. Cars slowed as drivers passed, some accelerating away, others staring a little too long. No one stepped forward to tear it down. The message was clear. The battle in the South Bronx hadn't been an ending. It was an opening move. This was chess, not checkers, and these New York YNs wasn't playing.